What if unanimous agreement is actually a warning sign? Inside the world's most trusted risk framework lies a hidden psychological trap, one that turns protection into recklessness. The answer will change how you see.
What is the truth about the three lines of defense? Is it a foolproof shield against financial ruin, or a corporate illusion hiding a much darker reality?
Behind closed doors, this celebrated risk framework often masks a dangerous psychological trap. It was designed to save banks from themselves, but in practice, it might just be the very thing driving them toward catastrophic failure.
What exactly are these three lines meant to defend against? In theory, the framework divides a bank into distinct layers of protection, ensuring that reckless behavior is caught before disaster strikes.
The first line is the business itself, generating revenue but owning the risk. The second line is the compliance team, acting as the independent watchdog. The third line is internal audit, grading everyone else. It is a perfectly logical system engineered to stop institutional greed.
If the structure is so clear, why do massive, heavily regulated banks still fail so spectacularly? How does a multi-billion-dollar safety net just vanish in an instant?
The framework creates a false sense of security. When a bank implements the three lines, executives often assume the system runs on autopilot. They trust the organizational chart, failing to realize that human psychology and immense profit motives are actively corroding those defensive walls.
How does a historic $5.5 billion loss happen right under the nose of a massive risk department? In 2021, Credit Suisse suffered exactly this fate when the Archegos hedge fund spectacularly collapsed.
The independent Paul Weiss report revealed a devastating truth. The bank's massive losses weren't caused by a lack of risk personnel, but by severe framework failures. Instead of acting as a firm brake on reckless trading, the risk department had become an accommodating, paralyzed rubber stamp.
Wait, how did the risk department become a rubber stamp instead of a brake? Weren't they explicitly hired to enforce limits against the business units?
They were, but the first line's relentless pursuit of profit overpowered them. The report found that the second line repeatedly granted limit exceptions instead of enforcing hard stops. Risk managers were intimidated by star traders, granting endless extensions until the systemic exposure imploded the institution.
What happens when the business side actually controls the risk side? In the infamous Wells Fargo fake account scandal, the organizational chart itself became a weapon against proper oversight and regulatory compliance.
The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency found that Wells Fargo's second line was structurally decentralized. Crucially, risk managers reported directly to the first-line business heads they were supposed to be policing. This destroyed any semblance of independence, allowing toxic sales practices to flourish.
How are regulators punishing this lack of independence? If a bank intentionally strips its risk team of authority, who actually pays the price when the inevitable regulatory hammer finally falls?
The consequences have become intensely personal. In an unprecedented move, the OCC issued massive personal fines to former Wells Fargo executives. They weren't just punished for the fake accounts, but specifically for failing to ensure an independent, effective second line of defense.
Is this just a problem for legacy megabanks? Surely the new generation of agile, digital-only neobanks have built smarter, automated defenses that eliminate these old-school human failures.
Actually, the opposite is true. Digital darlings like Starling Bank and Monzo recently learned this the hard way. The UK's Financial Conduct Authority slapped them with nearly £50 million in combined fines. Their technological speed was dangerously overriding their human risk oversight.
Why are cutting-edge digital banks facing massive regulatory fines? If their core advantage is superior technology and real-time data, how do systemic anti-money laundering failures slip through the cracks?
Neobanks scale so fast that their first-line revenue engines drastically outpace their second-line compliance teams. They relied heavily on algorithms to catch financial crime, but failed to build the human governance framework required to manage those systems. They prioritized customer onboarding speed over essential risk friction.
What about regional banks with fewer resources? If global giants and tech-savvy neobanks are failing to maintain the three lines of defense, how do smaller institutions survive the intense regulatory scrutiny?
Regional banks frequently suffer from a blurred lines scenario. Due to severe budget constraints, the separation between the first and second lines evaporates. Business owners end up essentially grading their own risk homework. This lack of independence creates a massive governance gap, leaving them highly vulnerable.
How do regulators know if a board is actually managing risk or just pretending? If the paperwork looks perfect on the surface, how do auditors expose the corporate illusion?
They look for harmony. Regulators now view unanimous, immediate board approvals as a massive red flag, not a sign of a well-run bank. If every risk report is instantly agreed upon with zero debate, auditors know the second line has been completely neutralized.
If unanimous agreement is bad, what exactly are auditors looking for? What proves to a regulator that the three lines of defense are actually functioning as intended?
Auditors actively hunt for memorialized friction in the board minutes. They want documented proof of heated debates, pushback, and evidence that the risk team actually looked the business in the eye and said no. They demand to see critical analysis by objective, informed parties.
What happens if risk warnings are buried in the back of a board packet? If the second line raises a red flag but hides it in an appendix, does that count?
Absolutely not. If systemic risk issues are buried deep in a 300-page board pack rather than clearly escalated to the front page, auditors will fail the bank's entire governance framework. Passive reporting is dead. The second line must force the first line to confront the ugly truth.
How is artificial intelligence changing this hunt for friction? As advanced algorithms take over complex risk reporting, are they making the three lines of defense stronger or dangerously opaque?
AI is creating a terrifying new black box dilemma. The first line is deploying complex predictive models that the second line struggles to understand, let alone challenge. If the risk team cannot explain how an algorithm arrived at a decision, they cannot provide effective challenge.
So, what is the ultimate truth about the three lines of defense today? What is the real threat hiding inside this globally mandated framework?
The biggest threat isn't a lack of oversight, but a psychological trap called risk abdication. The mere existence of a compliance team causes business units to recklessly abandon their own risk ownership. To combat this illusion of control, auditors ruthlessly hunt for documented friction, while regulators demand explainable AI before algorithms blind boards to the very risks they must manage.
Can any system truly eliminate human recklessness? If risk abdication is a psychological trap, will the next iteration of the three lines model finally fix the flaw?
Frameworks don't stop crises. Courageous people do. The updated three lines model emphasizes collaboration, but without genuine independence and a culture that rewards friction, it remains just ink on paper. True governance isn't about perfectly drawn organizational charts. It is a relentless, daily battle against the very human instinct to look the other way.